Flag protocol. Somebody check that?
Ms. Heater, will you look at flag protocol and get back to Ms. O'Bannon?
Yes,
Well, the other thing I will say is also in her comment that the eagle should be facing towards us, not against the wall.
Roger that. We'll duly noted and we'll have that fixed.
It does not have to be in it.
All right, very well. The next item on the agenda is a roll call of attendees and the certification quorum. Ms. Gogel, thank you.
Dr. McGraw,
Here.
Ms. Abbott, Mr. Chambers,
Here.
Mr. Hoda, Mr. Winslow, Mr. Holland,
Here.
Mr. Carroll,
Here.
Ms. Haley, Mr. Engel,
Here.
Ms. Fry, Mr. Davy, Mr. Sharp,
Here.
Mr. Spoonhour,
Here.
Mr. Davis,
Here.
Mr. Peterson,
Check for Curtis here, the alternate from Mr. Peterson.
noted, thank you. Mr. Whitaker,
Here.
Mr. Waddell,
Present.
Reverend Nelson, Ms. O'Bannon,
Here.
Mr. Thornton,
Here.
Miss Thornton, here, Mr. Baca,
Here.
Ms. Page,
Here. She's here. I know.
Mr. Lockwood, Ms. Pearson,
Here.
Mr. Byerly,
Here.
Mr. McClung, Mr. Hall,
So it was not just me.
Mr. Hall.
Dr. Newbill,
Here.
Gilbert, if you could speak up, it would be helpful. We're having a hard time hearing you.
sorry about that. Mr. Addison, Miss Lambert, Miss Lynch, Miss Robertson, Mr. Poole, and Mr. Giovia.
Here.
That concludes the roll call. Our quorum is present.
Gilbert, you need to speak into the microphone, please.
Sorry about that. That concludes the roll call. A quorum is present.
Very well, we've got a roll call and we have certification of a quorum. For the purpose of the record, I'm Sean Davis. I serve as vice chair. Mr. Winslow, chair of PlanRVA, is not with us today and I'll chair this meeting. At this time, we'll move into item 1C, public comments. Is there anyone here who wishes to make public comments? Seeing none, we will close public comment time. The next item on the agenda is a consent agenda. Before we go into the consent agenda, I want to make sure we have approval of this agenda by voice vote, as all members had an opportunity to review the agenda and are there any changes?
I have a request for a change.
Very well, Ms. O'Bannon.
At the Transportation Planning Organization meeting, we were presented with the projects for Smart Scale, and we had 10 projects from the TPO, and they said they were 5 that came from the PDC, the PlanRVA, and the people at the TPO did not recall the discussion of those items. So I was hoping we could cover those 5 items, and I have the list. The pre-application from PlanRVA. Want this? Okay. But no one there at the TPO remembered, and there were many that were at the PDC. Does anyone, and I wanted to discuss it. Yeah, the ones at the bottom.
Okay, so Ms. O'Bannon has submitted a requested change to add NB 288 continuous Woodlake Village Parkway, 360 Mechanicsville Turnpike, Parham Project Pipeline, and I-95 Brooks Road to the agenda. Is there any
It's in the
opposition to
staff
that?
report.
Very well. We'll now vote on the amended agenda. Are there any other concerns or any other comments, any concerns, any discussion? Call for a voice vote to approve the agenda. I move that we approve the agenda. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second by Mr. Waddell. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Very well. The amended agenda has been approved. The next item is 2B, the meeting minutes. It has been asked to remove those. We removed them from the executive committee as well to discuss in April after we have some staff consult. There's been a request to update some information in those minutes. Is there any opposition to removing that? Very well. Any discussion? All those in favor of removing the minutes from the agenda for discussion and proposed approval in April, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Very well, that'll be discussed in April. Next item on the agenda, item number 3 is standing committee and other reports. We're gonna start with the succession plan. We have item 1, 2, 3, and 4. I will introduce those separately. I'm gonna turn it over to Ms. Heater to talk about item 3A1, succession management plan. Ms. Heater.
Thank you. The executive committee took action this morning to place an item on your agenda for April, so this is just a bit of a preview. We received a grant in 2020 from Virginia Housing in the capacity building program for $20,000 to support the development of a succession management plan. And so the results of that effort came before the executive committee as an information item last month and as an action item this month, and it will come to you for full consideration. So the material will be included in your packet next month, and we'll have a recommendation from the executive committee to approve the proposed succession management plan. The purpose of this document is to be able to establish procedures and protocols for what to do, frankly, in the event that the executive director or a lead staff member within the organization, in this document that's identified as the director of transportation, the director of regional planning or GIS, and our environmental program manager, if there's a short-term or a long-term absence in those positions or vacancy. And so that will be on the agenda for next month for discussion. We'll make sure that we have time set aside to be able to review and give you a little bit more background.
Very well, thank you, Ms. Heater. The next item is the CVT update. So by way of introduction, the executive committee reviewed a matter brought to PlanRVA by CVTA, and that matter was to have the CVTA executive director position, which is vacant at this point. There's a hiring process, and it's a regional project to bring someone into that position. Candidate review and interviews are being handled by multi-jurisdictions. That said, the executive committee had a rather robust discussion. There are some matters that CVTA thought about that they would like to have some cooperation from PlanRVA, and that is to have the CVTA executive director have benefits and compensation handled by PlanRVA, as well as house that individual within PlanRVA. It would require an MOU because it would not be a direct report. After a lot of discussion, I anticipate there'll be discussion at the full commission meeting at this time. There was a vote, a two-part vote, voted in the affirmative to not only advance this to the full commission, but with the recommendation that it be approved. Certainly, it's open for discussion because a lot of folks have talked about their concerns with this, weighing the things that we know, the things that we don't know, and then some of the potential benefits. So I'm going to ask Ms. Heater to introduce this and talk topically on it. Then I was going to ask Mr. Byerly and Ms. Page and Mr. Spoonhauer if they would give their comments that they gave in the executive committee meeting to the full commission to, I think, give better context. Ms. Heater?
Thank you. I'll recognize first that we are aware that there are many overlaps in membership among the PlanRVA commission members and the CVTA. So this information is probably very familiar and redundant to some of you, but not for all of you. So Just a little bit of background, PlanRVA staff have been providing support to the CBTA since its formation in August of 2020, and actually prior to, in an informal way, prior to that inaugural meeting. Personnel that are regularly performing tasks or work for the CBTA include Mr. Parsons, Ms. Firestone, myself, and a handful of other staff members that provide support as needed for technical and administrative activities. We do invoice the CBTA on a quarterly basis for that time, and so we have a cost recovery mechanism in place to be able to support those activities. As Mr. Davis mentioned, at the February 25th CBTA meeting, the authority members did vote to initiate a recruitment process for an executive director. That process is being managed by the HR roundtable, and Mrs. Page and Mr. Spoonhauer are the designated authority representatives responsible for screening candidates and making recommendations to the full authority for selection. We've been working with the authority leadership now for about eight or 9 months to talk about the ways that PlanRVA could continue to support CBTA under a new staffing model, and had discussed, as Mr. Davis indicated this morning, the opportunity that's before us to be able to provide ongoing support in the form of hosting or housing that executive director position within PlanRVA's structure that will enable that individual to access our payroll, health insurance, retirement benefits through our systems, as opposed to having to create those systems and negotiate those benefits for an employee role of one. In addition to that, we recognize that there will be a transition period where there's a passive knowledge, if you will, and are prepared to be able to provide that for the appropriate amount of time. And we expect that there will be a need to continue to provide administrative and technical support, as we have historically, to be able to assure that that executive director has the supports that they need to be able to fulfill their duties. We talked through in this morning's meeting some of the key terms that I believe should be incorporated into a new MOU. We have had an MOU that was renewed twice over the last 2 fiscal years, but it was fairly generic, and to be frank, it was for lack of knowing what would be needed. We tried to keep it as open as possible, but we think with the benefit of the last 2 years of support, we have the ability to have a much stronger and tighter MOU that can really define the roles and relationships. So my understanding from the executive committee meeting this morning is that there is support for us continuing to move down this path of negotiating an arrangement. And I got some really good feedback this morning from the executive committee about how that how that agreement for next fiscal year could be constructed in a way that protects, frankly, both agencies.
Thank you, Ms. Heater. Mr. Spoonhauer, would you care to opine, sir?
Sure. So thanks for consideration in this. First off, some of you may or may not know that we've engaged HR Roundtable, which is direct support from your directors of HR in Hanover with Ms. Lawson, Ms. Selby in Chesterfield, Ms. George in Henrico, Ms. Easley Atkins from Richmond, and Ms. Cornwell from Ashland. You should all be extremely proud because they are a top-notch team, so we thank them for their efforts in this. We've looked at a lot of different strategies. We've looked at this 3 ways from Sunday, and this seems to make the most sense from start, as Mr. Thornton likes to say, birthing a new organization. And we appreciate the consideration. Our goal is to engage in conversation early and to be able to come up with a win-win-win for everybody. So 3 organizations, a win for everybody. It's a revenue generator for PlanRVA. It's great for the citizens because it's the most cost-effective and allows us flexibility to grow. What we do today isn't what we need to be doing 3 or 5 years from now, but allows us to expeditiously and financially responsibly bring in an executive director to help grow this organization. One of the things that we looked at several different models, whether this would be the CBTA director would be an employer or an employee. The employee models make sense, and while not exactly apples to apples, it's something that PlanRVA is familiar with and has experience with. So I don't know of a better place for this to reside, and quite frankly, if the commission rejects this, odds are it's coming back through the RTPO as Mr. Parsons is wearing the hat of the interim director. So having this support in a very firm MOU. That's where we all want to be. We all want to be on the same page. We want to make sure, and I think one of the large points of discussion has been, what is the reporting structure? Who does this executive director report to? And at the end of the day, it's going to be the CVTA. And making sure, when everything sits in one house, which is great, but also can create some confusion. If something goes wrong, is somebody calling Ms. Heater? Are they calling Mr. Thornton as chair of the CVTA? And the latter would be my response. And Ms. Heater shaking her head in the affirmative. So we hope you will consider this, and thank you for your consideration in it.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Page, do you care to comment, ma'am?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaking under the hat of CVTA, I do want to first thank PlanRVA and especially Ms. Heater and he walked out, Mr. Parsons, for all of the work that they've done. As we know, the CVTA was formed and its purpose was so that we could have funds to leverage smart scale so that we could get transportation projects done. And so with that being said, I guess I'm the budget conscious one in this group. And so for me, it becomes, do we want CVTA to have a free ride? Absolutely not. We would absolutely encourage a strong MOU between both entities. Do we want the responsibility of executive director of either PlanRVA or TPO to supervise this person? Absolutely not, as Mr. Spoonhauer just stated. But we do think that as we seek to get funds for projects, that it would be not only for our projects, but it would absolutely ensure a way that PlanRVA and TPO will reap the benefits, as well as our localities, by having us have a office space for one person versus going out somewhere else. We talked about moving to another facility, so absolutely it would help. We do believe that PlanRVA does have the experience of being, I don't want to say a payroll service, but maybe payroll service. So they do have that experience, and it keeps PlanRVA in the loop. It keeps all of our modes of transportation under one umbrella. And I would think that this body would absolutely encourage that. Ms. Heater did bring out in her report that the 3 executive directors, she, Mr. Parsons, and the future executive director for CVTA, along with the chairs of CVTA and PlanRVA, will absolutely sit down and have discussions and have updates. So there's open communication between all of these entities. So as Mrs. Spoonhouse said, I am appreciative of all of the work that the HR Roundtable has done as we proceed to move on. Your thoughts on the forefront are absolutely important to us. I don't believe in wasting a lot of time going back over things. So with me, it's like it's better to get it out now, and we can follow whatever process we got to do, make the decisions that need to be made, versus coming back and then we got to go back through and rework some things. So this is the most, in time management, I think this is the best way to do it. And it's your opportunity to get, what are your thoughts on it? What are your thoughts on it? What do you want? And are we moving in a direction that you want us to move? And if it's heartburn, then just let it be known. If not, let us move on with getting this executive director here. And just to reiterate and make sure that with administrative staff and the uses through PlanRVA, that we have a strong MOU, that they're absolutely being compensated for the time and the work that's being placed into this. And so that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Biley, you had some comments on executive, and then I also want to recognize Chairman Thornton, who's chair of CBTA, give him an opportunity if he desires. You made some comments in the executive committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank Ms. Heater for the report. And I think that with the birth of this organization, the CVTA, which Mr. Thornton refers to it often, we bring both entities together. We all serve this region, and it is about this region. I think to be redundant a little bit with what Mr. Spoonhour and Ms. Page said, the communication is critical, and how these two entities communicate back and forth will be absolutely critical in the success of this program. I think to have a compendious MOU, I think that's going to be another thing that is these members all participate and talk about and bring in the different ideas of how we can avoid pitfalls collectively, to be a united front working together. I think that's critical. I think the open communication down the road that Ms. Page mentioned, where the executive directors and the chairs of the two organizations can communicate, is another component that creates an opportunity for success. And that's basically my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So those are the comments from discussion in the executive committee. Mr. Thornton, do you have any comments as chair of CVTA?
Mr. Chairman, I just am happy that we are at a point in time with this district. It is an opportunity for us. We probably should have had it years ago, but this is the time for our particular wine. And I'm just excited that we are trying to create now the very most creative transportation system for this region. And we do it in a metaphorical way. We talk about family, all the members. And we talk about RNC, respect and collegiality. And those will be the things which will make, hopefully, CVTA different from other areas, because each one is different and unique. And we want to make sure ours is different and unique and creative.
So thank you, sir, for those comments. Is there any further discussion?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
I serve on the CBTA as well, and what I will say is that I think, number one, PlanRVA has done an outstanding job in the support role to help stand up the organization. I don't think that we could have done it without them. They've been essential, and as my colleague has said before, in standing this organization up, we're setting the standard for the future, and I think this is bringing the executive director in this way will help, number one, solidify PlanRVA's continuing involvement with the CVTA and continue to move us forward so that the CVTA can get down to the business of what we were put together to do, which is solve some of the transportation problems in the Richmond area. So I definitely support this MOU.
Thank you, sir. Any further comments? Okay, hearing none, we drafted a proposed motion.
Dr. Newbill.
Oh, Dr. Newbill, my apologies, ma'am. Dr. Newbill, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I was simply going to suggest and actually make a motion that we move forward with the memorandum as proposed. I think Ms. Heater and certainly PlanRVA, TPO, and the whole working group have done an excellent job of delineating the components that are critical to the success of these entities working together. And would just like to make a motion that we move forward with the MOU as currently codified.
Very well. Thank you, Doctor. So I understand that Dr. Newbill has made a motion to direct staff to engage with CVTA to negotiate terms of an MOU to include terms in the MOU that PlanRVA is to host the executive director of CVTA, and further that PlanRVA to provide support to that position as defined by the MOU, and further that the employee that the CVTA director will be an employee of PlanRVA, with CVTA being a direct report to CVTA. Is that your motion? The executive director being a direct report to the CVTA. With the did I not say that?
The executive director would have a direct report to the CVTA.
Correct.
That's correct.
To the CVTA.
And the performance evaluation would be done by CVTA as well,
Yeah.
of that executive director.
Very well. That's your motion, Dr. Newbill?
Yes.
Very well. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
You need to take that.
All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. We are going to do a roll call vote. Ms. Godell.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, awesome. All right, Dr. McGraw,
Aye.
Mr. Chambers,
Aye.
Mr. Holland,
Enthusiastically, aye.
Mr. Carroll,
Equally as enthusiastically, Mr. Hull.
Mr. Engel,
Aye.
Ms. Fry. Aye. Mr. Sharp,
Aye.
Chair Davis,
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker,
Aye.
Mr. Waddell,
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon,
Aye.
Gilbreth, I apologize. Would you please call Ms. Pritchard's name? She's here for
Oh.
Mr. Peterson today.
yes. Ms. Pritchard,
Aye.
Mr. Thornton,
Aye.
Ms. Thornton. Aye. Mr. Baca,
Aye.
Ms. Page,
Aye.
Ms. Pearson,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Dr. Newbill,
Aye.
and Mr. Giovia.
Aye.
That concludes the roll call.
Thank you, ma'am. Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is item 3A3. As you recall, that was amended to add 5 items that Ms. O'Bannon asked to be added, and it was approved. We'll ask Chet to go over the RTP. Mr. Parsons.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I had 2 items to bring to your attention this morning. The first is something that the executive committee discussed briefly regarding efforts to better publicize and let the public be aware of the coordinated efforts between PlanRVA, the TPO, and CVTA. One of those efforts, what I wanted to share with you this morning, came about as a result of a work group that was set up by the TPO, chaired by Dr. Newbill and others in the room today. One of the recommendations that came back from that work group was to look at establishing a joint annual meeting between the 3 organizations to celebrate the successes, talk about plans for the future and ways that we can move forward as a region. Staff's recommendation in talking with the work group is to look at the month of June as a possible window for holding that joint meeting, as long as it works out for the ability of each organization to continue its business. So I think the request is if it seems acceptable to the commission, that staff can move forward with working on the logistics and making sure that there is a date that works between TPO, PlanRVA, and the CVTA to move that effort forward and try and get that on the books for this year. Ms. Heater, do we need action on that?
I wasn't expecting that we would need a motion. I think just want to make sure, in the spirit of that communication, that everybody knows we're going to be submitting that communication to everyone, polling for the availability.
Is there any opposition to that? We're not going to take a vote, but is anybody voicing any opposition? If not, we'll presume that that's consensus, of course. Any questions, comments, any discussion? Very well. I think that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had one other item, and this is related to Smart Scale. This is a new revelation, I will say, that has come to our attention over the past few weeks. And the TPO has discussed this at their meeting last week. There is a one-page handout that is being distributed by Ms. Heater to those in the room. Folks on the call that are remote, it is posted on the website as well with the meeting materials. I had some a couple slides, Mr. Chair, if it's all right if I share those, to kind of help explain where we are.
Well, this was the discussion I was saying at the TPO.
Correct. Right.
And then it seems we sort of had the cart before the horse. It hadn't been explained, but, you know.
We're just very thorough, Ms. Bannon, so now that it's been added, we're gonna discuss it
Okay.
comprehensive.
I'm just gonna say that we had not known before. And how long has Smart Scale been in effect? 5 years?
I'm sorry.
Smart Scale has been,
10 years,
10
it's 2
years.
years between, so there's been 5 rounds.
and
This is the
so
fifth
there
round.
have been that many years that we did not, the PlanRVA or PDC did not put in any applications. So is this the explanation of that? I just wanted to know what changed.
Yes, ma'am. I was hoping to provide some more detail on that.
Okay.
That's part of the presentation in the amended agenda. These are the things that you brought forward, and
So
then
is he gonna explain it now?
Mr. Parsons can go into it. Yes, ma'am.
All right, that's all.
Mr. Parsons, thank you, sir.
Thank you. As you can see on the screen, just wanted to provide a little bit of background for those that aren't familiar. Smart Scale is a funding process where projects are applied for and scored from all across the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth, and where benefits are calculated, projects are eventually ranked and then approved for a round of funding every 2 years. And we are now into round 5. At pre-applications, there's two windows, pre-applications and full applications. The pre-applications started on March 1st and are due by the end of the month. They allow for screening of projects, whether they are eligible or not for this funding stream. Full applications are due by the end of August. And depending on population and other criteria, there are different amounts of projects that can be applied for different organizations. RRTPO, as the MPO for the Central Virginia region, is allowed to submit 12 pre-applications and 10 full applications. According to the Smart Scale guidelines, PDCs in Virginia also have an opportunity to submit applications. Projects are recommended to be consistent with the Regional Long Range Transportation Plan, and the types include highway, transit, rail, road safety improvements, operational improvements, and transportation demand management. The following types of organizations can apply. Predominantly, it's going to be MPOs. PDCs are also able to apply. Counties, cities, towns, and transit agencies. Some transit agencies are also eligible applicants. The cycle, as I said, is a 2-year process. We are at the start right now for the pre-application, so we're early on in the process, but this is where projects get introduced and evaluated. When the TPO has been applying for projects through all 5 rounds. This is not a new process. There are different wrinkles that are introduced each time. For this round, round 5, the TPO screened 40 projects against the Smart Scale criteria. And our technical committee, which is made up of staff and representatives from each of the member jurisdictions, all 9 jurisdictions, plus GRTC, VDOT, DRPT, Public Rail and Public Transit. They narrowed the list to 16 projects that met all the criteria and satisfied local priorities. 12 of those projects were recommended by the TAC for the TPO pre-application list. So that means there were 4 projects that were left out. Clarification was received about 2 weeks ago from VDOT that PlanRVA also has the opportunity to submit pre-applications. With that news, the TAC met and the TPO was able to act upon a recommendation that if it is the commission's desire, those remaining 4 projects that have already been screened for eligibility and support from each of the 9 jurisdictions could be a list of 4 projects that PlanRVA could use, with the addition of 1 additional project that has been submitted in previous rounds. That would include a pre-application for all of the projects that the TAC and the TPO have deemed as priorities. It would provide more opportunity for this region to receive funding because there would be more applications in the hopper. And the TPO is in support and will provide the staff support necessary to get those applications submitted. And if they are deemed eligible, to move through the entire process so that we have as much of a competitive advantage as possible when we are looking for funding through this smart scale window against regions like Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia or Roanoke or other areas of the state. The 5 projects that the TPO is recommending are listed on the screen. And just a reminder, the pre-application deadline is April 1st. Staff is moving through the process right now and is ready and willing to assist if the commission desires to submit these 5 applications for this round of smart scale. The handout that Ms. Heater shared basically explains this information and describes the action taken by the TPO on March 3rd with, again, the list of the projects that are recommended to the commission. So I think there is no recommendation at this point from the TPO, but just the offer to provide staff support and a willingness to assist if the commission decides to move forward with this process. And I know there are a number of folks in the room that serve on the TPO that might want to provide additional insight and information. Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Ms. Heater to address the 5 projects that we have here, and then we'll open it up for questions for either Ms. Parsons or Ms. Heater as we want to be comprehensive because I know Ms. Bannon had some questions.
The questions came from the TPO, so any member of the TPO that's here can
Sure.
ask the same question.
Well, and they certainly can. And Ms. Heater, do you want to give that update and then we'll open it up?
Yeah, I'll just basically reiterate a couple of the points that Chet made. In the previous 4 rounds, it was our understanding that while the guidelines provided for the opportunity for PDCs to submit smart scale applications, our understanding was that that was geared toward PDCs who covered areas that were not served by an MPO. And so this information, as Chet indicated, is new information that it now is being provided to us in the form of guidance that in fact PDCs can submit for projects in communities that are served by an MPO. So this is new information. It was not our understanding in the prior 4 rounds, and that is, to be completely honest, the answer to the question of why we PlanRVA, Richmond Regional Planning District Commission, has not previously submitted. Sorry, Chet, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mr. Chair. Point of information, Mr. Winslow, I think made a great point at the TPO meeting on the 3rd that it may be that the interpretation of the smart scale guidelines has changed over the years I don't know if the language has changed, but the eligibility of PDCs where there is MPO overlap may have changed in the interpretation as the guidelines have moved through the 5 rounds.
Thank you.
I last week after the TPO meeting had a chance to speak with 3 other executive directors of PDCs who each gave me their own individual's different interpretation of these very guidelines. So I would say that there is lack of clarity across the state, and each of the 3 PDCs are hosts to their community's MPOs. They were the Crater Planning District that hosts the Tri-Cities MPO, which is, as those of you who are involved in that know, the Tri-Cities MPO is a very small portion of the Crater PDC planning region. That staff group responded that they actually believe that we were not eligible as a PDC to submit. We're of course taking the guidance from VDOT and not from another PDC, but it was interesting to hear that perspective. I also spoke with the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission Director, who is the Charlottesville area MPO. They advised that the only time that the Planning District Commission itself, as opposed to the MPO, submits smart scale applications is when a locality that has not fulfilled that has projects that exceed the number of slots that the locality can submit. That's the only time the PDC essentially participates. and Roanoke Allegheny Valley Regional Commission and their Roanoke Regional TPO confirmed the same practice. So Mr. Winslow and I were in pretty regular communication on Thursday and Friday on this matter, and that's the new information that we've been able to identify since last week's discussion at the TPO meeting. With regard to the five projects, Chet and I spoke about this as soon as the information was available, and we felt like, given the work that the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization has done over the last several years to perfect a regional prioritization process, it would be inappropriate for PlanRVA to just stand up its own project selection process. And so from a staff recommendation perspective, we do believe that it's a wise decision to be able to honor and respect the process that the TPO has established for ranking and prioritization of projects. And that is why the 5 projects that you see here are the next, if you will, in line after the 12 that were identified for the pre-screening and submission. We're certainly open to your direction. It is the prerogative of PlanRVA, but we think that in the spirit of the cooperation that we've discussed today, and to be respectful of the group of people who have worked for decades now to be able to develop that ranking and prioritization process, it made sense to be able to come with that. And that's why we scheduled, also because of the timing of the meetings, but that's why we intentionally scheduled this discussion for last week's TPO meeting so that that recommendation could come before this body with the recommendation of these 5 projects.
Thank you, Ms. Heater. Thank you, Mr. Park. Yes, certainly.
Wait, one more point, and I want to be clear, these 5 projects are not staff recommendations. These came directly from the jurisdictions. So there are
We'll
2
make
projects that
Yep.
came directly from Chesterfield, 2 projects directly from Henrico, and then the last, the Powhatan Goochland 288 project, was a previous submission, so we know that it is eligible.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. Is there discussion or comments? Ms. O'Bannon?
Well, at the TPO meeting, the discussion did get into it. We all know, well, these came from the TAC too, the Technical Advisory Committee had already gone over these. I'm not questioning it that way. It got into the fact that how is the best way to present this to smart scale, the people making the decisions? Should the PDC or PlanRVA pick, in other words, why add to the list? Because will that water down the amount of money we get? Or would it be better to just say the top 5 that we picked from the other group of 12? In other words, what is the strategy here? Through the years, there've been different strategies when you try to get money from the state, and this is smart scale. And they have obviously through the years changed the way the process that they do it. Originally, this is a long time ago, we pretty much threw everything at it and saw what we would get that would come back. And then we got into only picking a few that we knew there was probably that much money. And would that then mean that those few projects would be taken? Or are they going to choose all the low-cost projects and then do those, and we're still left with major projects? In other words, it was a question of the strategy that would be used. What we have done in doing this has been, from everybody bringing this up and making this list, there are now 17 different projects. And it did get to the point where it said it's like the type of thing that we're just throwing everything on the wall and seeing what sticks. So what is the strategy that's being used by choosing them this way? That was the question. We went ahead and said, sure, because we did not have a lot of information. We didn't know what you just said. That wasn't really explained. So this is where it ended, was, okay, we'll do it, but what is going to be the strategy on presenting these to the smart scale? Because we want to be sure that some projects obviously are not going to get fully funding, and they're all pages and pages of information behind them with matching funds and all that. But what is the best strategy? It seems like this was, I'll just say it, kind of last minute, or you just found out, so you went ahead and just added the next 5 projects, or what is the strategy?
I'll answer and then defer to you, Chad, as the expert. I believe that in the conversation last week, I heard Mr. Mann say that it would not be recommended from a state perspective to submit proposals that are already part of that initial 12. In other words, it doesn't make the application stronger by doing a multiple submission of the same project. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that he advised that. The strategy, you're spot on, Mrs. O'Bannon. It has changed every one of the 4 rounds, and that's been as we've debriefed what the awards were each time, and we've understood. I do recall in my tenure here that there were years when the TPO did not submit its full 10 that it had available. I think we maybe submitted 8 one year, and you recall that as well. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. The process, while we are 10 years into it, it's hard to believe, has been a bit of a moving target. And I think the jurisdictions have continued to grapple with that statewide. Our staff believes that the strategy, the best strategy for increasing competitiveness of our regional projects would be to submit this whole 17. That's based on the analysis of how projects were selected in round 4 and the knowledge of how they were selected in the prior rounds, as well as the counsel and guidance from the state. It's my understanding that the Technical Advisory Committee agrees with that and believes that these 5 projects should be the 5 projects submitted by PlanRVA to be able to frankly maximize our application potential now that we know that. I can't speak to, because I wasn't directly involved in the process in previous rounds, but I think that there was sound rationale in previous rounds to do just what you described, Mrs. O'Bannon, but I think our understanding after evaluation of these 4 rounds is that this is the right strategy to go, to put as many projects forward as we can for the slots available, and to be as aggressive in the ranking and prioritization process to make sure that the quality of those 17 projects are the best that we have to offer from the region. Chet,
I think what Ms. Heater said was spot on. The 17 projects are the top prioritized projects by the technical committee. So I think that the regional buy-in is there for this list of projects. I think in terms of the Smart Scale program and the strategy, the scoring is in somewhat of a black box. So a lot of times, depending on the round, we don't have a way to best predict what happens. I will say that there is no set aside for Central Virginia. So whatever we put in is competing against projects from all the other parts of the state. So I think the thought is, if we have a higher percentage of possible projects in the hopper, there's a better chance that we may hit on some of those. So I think that's the approach right now. I think obviously learning this information when we did, the TPO is certainly going to have some comments to share back with OIP and VDOT when the round is over, to gain some better understanding and how the relationship between PDCs and MPOs should be moving forward. I have some concerns about the 2 different application windows, but I think that's for a debrief after round 5 is over.
Think further.
Mr. Chair, I think that, thank you, Chet. I think that where we need to be is the questions that we're asking, we need to ask the question from the people that made the decision. The TAC made the decision. I mean, surely they passed information on to you, but I think that when it comes to smart scale and projects, i.e., how do we know the projects when we have 2 that don't even have a cost estimate on it? So I think it would be an invitation to the TAC to come before the TPO and before the PlanRVA and explain their decision making. Maybe some of you know, but I don't know what it is. And so, I mean, the other day I felt a certain way about it. I mean, certainly today I feel like if we can put a ton of projects in, we just put a ton of projects in. But I do have one specific question. How many rounds are there to smart scale?
This is the 5th. So if you look back historically, and it's every 2 years. So the Smart Scale's been around for essentially 9 years, 10 years. And the TPO has done well in rounds 1 and 2. Rounds 3 and 4, not so much. And a lot of that is because of the other projects that have been eligible around the state. We don't expect there's a Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel in round 5 or something of that magnitude, which took a lot of the emphasis from round 4. So it's all about what projects are out there and what the application pool looks like in terms of how competitive we can be.
So the round is just based on every 2 years?
Yes.
Okay, so you just keep hope alive until hopefully a project gets there, okay. I mean, it's like, what day does it end? You know, you say, okay, we didn't make it, so we're going to this round. So that's why I asked that question. I don't know.
I think it ends when it's funded. That's how we know, when it comes up, but there are certainly, as local leaders, I think there's a consensus that smart scale is frustrating and cumbersome. But it is the path we have to travel, but yeah.
It is.
Absolutely. Point well made, Ms. Page. Yes, sir.
Chair, as far as the history of this, what I would recommend to staff is, all of this is done by legislation, right? So, and then reviewing legislation right now, you can go back and see, even smart scale, they point to code 332319. And then if you look at the history of that code, it's been modified many times throughout the years, with a big modification back in 2002, which is probably when smart scale was brought about. So I think it's beneficial to contact perhaps legislative services and get interpretation from them instead of contacting a bunch of other PDCs that are going to interpret things the way they think are appropriate for them to interpret it, not necessarily what the legislative intent was. And so, and then you could even maybe find out if that same legislator who carried that piece of legislation is still in the General Assembly, they may be able to give some insight. I found that to be very productive when trying to figure out when things have changed and why they've changed, because all of this has to be authorized by the state. That being said, I do agree with moving the projects forward. I think that, as we know, some of these projects may end up getting funded in a different way. They may get funded through the TPO. They may get funded. Some of them may end up getting funded with the federal infrastructure bill that's coming down. When there may be other. As an example, Chesterfield got some money from Congress last year for an infrastructure project that we're doing. So I think moving them forward is the right thing. And then as other projects may get funded, they can continue to be submitted and they may move up in that process.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Anything further? Mr. Waddell, then Mr. Spoonhour.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've got some questions for Chet. Smart scale, I understand the basics, and you may have answered this question with your black box comment. How are we privy to the algorithm or the review criteria, or is it somewhat subjective?
No, yes, we are privy. I actually just shared a link to the Smart Scale website in the chat, but there's a technical guide for round 5. It is slightly updated for each round, which kind of walks through the criteria and how the scoring is done. They don't give us a spreadsheet or anything like that, but we have an understanding of what the projects are scored on and how the weighting is placed and on.
Okay, then could the TAC use that scoring to review our candidate projects and winnow it out if applicable, or to Ms. O'Bannon's point, throw everything out there and hope for the best? And do they compete against each other for a pot of money in the 2-year cycle, or if the projects that come up in a 2-year cycle don't qualify, is there money left over? Multiple questions, I apologize.
I think the answer is yes, the TAC does. We haven't developed a tool per se to evaluate projects, but we do rely mostly on the local staff's experience and expertise. I mean, most everybody on the TAC is an engineer and is a prominent figure in the member government. So we rely on their expertise from past applications to help prioritize those projects. So when I mentioned that we had 40 initial projects, those came from staff based on previous applications and just an understanding of what might be eligible. The TAC used their expertise to narrow that down to 16. So without an official tool, there is a process that the TAC uses to come up with that final recommended list. I think that the projects do compete against each other. I think tax, not to speak for the tax chair, but I think the opinion is if a project in Hanover outscores a project in Henrico, regionally speaking, it's still a win because we get the money here rather than Tidewater or somewhere else. But I think that overall.
Can I actually just clarify that? I think maybe Mr. Walnut, you and I are thinking on the same lines, maybe not. But my question is, if we go with this approach, is our call it project, would have been RTPO's project number 13 is now PlanRVA's 1. Does R1 compete against, so does PlanRVA's 1 compete against number 1 for RTPO?
Yes.
So then should we do a 1, 3, 5, 6 in, so so now we're saying our 13th project is now competing with our number 1 project at the same level. That doesn't seem like a great strategy.
My perspective, being involved with all the different groups, is if we've got 17 projects, to me, it doesn't really make a difference whether it's a PlanRVA project or a TPO project. It all comes back.
Chet, can you clarify that? Are all number 1 projects scored against each other and then all number 2 projects?
No.
Or are they all put in to the bucket and they're all scored?
It's one big bucket.
So I
Okay,
don't think that
right, that's
13
not
becomes a 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Carroll?
As was explained to me last time and explained from staff, that the projects that are being submitted now, this particular 5 projects at the end, actually fall below the other ones that we submitted in order. And also, I believe the TAC is utilizing Smart Scale when they look at this to determine how they would score. And that's how they've kind of prioritized the numbers that they put them in the first place, both with the 12 that we submitted and now these 5. And so from a criterion point of view, these 5 are not going to be at the same level of competition simply by how they scored with the first 12 we put. These are just ones after that, but they may compete regionally throughout or against the rest of the state better than some of the projects they're submitting, whether it's from Southwest Virginia or somewhere else. And that's the purpose behind submitting these, because although, our first ones may do very well, and I hate, this is kind of mean to the small jurisdictions, I'll be honest with you. If you look at some of the other PDCs that exist that are trying to compete for this, if we don't put it in, they have a shot at getting something. If we put them in, we actually score better than them and get more money for our transportation projects. But competition is competition.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Anything further, Mr. Waddell?
Yes, the TAC is applying smart scale criteria. When we get reports like this, could we get the smart scale rankings for the different criteria, the different groupings for each of the projects, just to get an idea? I like detail. I like to get lost in detail.
I think if I understood Mr. Parsons' comments, there's not a spreadsheet that takes all the projects and goes through the smart scale criteria. It's a subjective review based on the experience of the TAC members in developing that. So
Which is different than what Mr. Carroll said.
we can certainly provide the,
So utilizing that, like she's saying, subjectively to say, this is how we believe they were gonna score.
We could certainly provide the scores from previous rounds.
and we can provide,
That
Mr.
came
Waddell,
from VDOT.
we can
but-
provide everything we have. I just want to be clear about expectations of what we have.
I just want more data. I operate under the assumption some's good, more's better, too much information is just right. Just sort of to get a bigger perspective. Yeah, the historic data from Smart Scale, but also these candidate projects, what our guesstimates are from the TAC as to how, just to keep a status.
Yeah, and I think we can also connect you with Mr. Vidunas, who's going to be a really strong resource in this. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything further?
Thank you.
So with that, we do have some decisions to make. Is there anyone who's prepared to make a motion to direct staff to submit smart scale applications as recommended by the TPO?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Dr. Newbill, seconded by Mr. Holland. Is there any further discussion?
One comment I might make
Mr.
to
Howell.
help the clarity's sake, I know historically we talked about the issues of congestion as being one of the big ones. That's why some of the other jurisdictions have ranked higher because, and environmental or other issues. So there's several of those issues I just might share for the benefit of the group. We've heard historically. And of course, the ranking was due to that. There were so many projects that Smart Scale had to scale down to 10 per jurisdictional region. So that's the history behind that. Just want to share that.
Thank you, Ms. Howell. Appreciate those comments. Any further discussion? Ms. Cogell, will you call the vote, please?
Yes, Chair. Dr. McGraw,
Aye.
Mr. Chambers,
Aye.
Mr. Holland, Mr. Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Engel,
Aye.
Ms. Fry,
Aye.
Mr. Sharp,
Aye.
Chair Davis,
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker,
Aye.
Mr. Waddell,
Aye.
and Martha, would you like me to call Ms. Pritchard as well?
Yes, please, on all the roll calls for this meeting.
Okay. Ms. Pritchard,
Aye.
Mr. Thornton,
Aye.
Ms. Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Baca,
Aye.
Ms. Page,
Aye.
Ms. Pearson,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Dr. Newbill,
Aye.
and Mr. Giovia.
Aye.
And that concludes the roll call.
Thank you. Motion passes. The next item on the agenda was item 3A4. However, we did not have an opportunity at the executive committee to receive an update on this. Martha and I spoke on it. It is employee health insurance opportunity, maybe to look at some different access, maybe some different carriers. There's no detail on that, so if there's no objection, we'll pass by this item because there's nothing really to present to the full commission. Any opposition? Hearing none, we'll move into 3B, Audit Facilities Finance Committee report. As you may know, the lease was signed on March 7th, Monday. There's some action items after we just have a discussion on this, on the authority to handle administrative logistics matters, some finance matters. But with that, Chair recognizes Mr. Holland of the Audit Facilities and Finance Committee. Mr. Holland?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We met just a week or so ago, and we looked at the logistics of the move, the timing thereof, and we, the Finance Committee, certainly welcomed the opportunity to help make sure this process goes as smooth as possible and that we're able to move forward as a body. And so I just want to say that we welcome your input, and I'll ask Ms. Healy to share any details other that we discussed regarding that move and where we are at this point and what we hope to accomplish as well. And before I stop, let me just take the opportunity to thank the Executive Committee for its wisdom and how it handled the CVTA issue. I gotta tell you, it's a win-win, as you say, Mr. Spomenhauser. It's a win-win, and we appreciate and applaud that effort as we move forward. I think it's great for the region in terms of transportation. And I see other opportunities I'll share at another time that I think can even further move us forward transportationally in this region. So thank you for that. I'll yield to Ms. Heater. I'd like her to share some more details.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Holland.
Relative
I
to
did
that.
share with the executive committee this morning, as Mr. Davis mentioned, the lease was signed on Monday. So we were able to accomplish that pretty significant task. Following the lease execution, we also have a call set up for tomorrow afternoon with the developer to talk about the next steps. We do intend to coordinate very closely with them, and so we'll be talking through that process. Yesterday, we had a project management call with Tallheimer's project manager called Katie Chalmers. We've completed a furniture inventory assessment and have also been looking into the directions that were given to us at the Finance Committee last meeting with regard to options to be able to manage the project schedule. Specifically, those include working with Mr. Gregory and the project management team to determine whether there's any options for construction bidding during the permitting process. We're also meeting with city staff in the City of Richmond's Building and Permitting Department tomorrow to talk through the third-party permitting process. We understand that that's a strong tool that the city offers to be able to expedite that portion of the project schedule, and are also looking at contingency planning for what happens if the project is not complete and ready, this new site is not ready for move-in by the time our move-out date occurs. So all of those items, homework assignments, are coming back to the Finance Committee at the next meeting. Mr. Chair, I'll defer to you to speak to the action that the Executive Committee recommends to the full board today.
Thank you. So an item is coming to the full board. It's a two-part item that was voted on. One was to advance this matter to the commission with an affirmative recommendation that the full board provide authority to the Audit Facilities and Finance Committee to handle project management, administrative decisions, logistical matters, all of the planning that comes through this. And some of the discussion was, and to make those decisions, and had the authority to make those decisions. There were two thoughts on how that could take place. One was, did they go receive information, bring it back to the full board? And that did seem onerous and laborious, but we did not want to have efficiency be the enemy of transparency. Finance, Audit, Facilities Committee has been handling a lot of this project, and we've had great update. Mr. Winslow, the chair, is an ex officio member of all committees. So the recommendation from the Executive Committee was to provide authority to the Audit, Finance, and Facilities Committee to handle the operations and project management of this with the parameters, as Ms. Page noted. The parameters set by the full board on the extent of their authority would be the budget that they have. They've helped prepare the budget. We voted on the budget. We've given them the authority to handle the budget. It seems reasonable that we would then give them the authority to handle this project within the parameters of the budget that's already been approved. So I'm going to open that up for any discussion. Is there any discussion on granting this committee the authority to handle the project management and all that may come with that as we transition into this new facility?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I will add that I think, and I don't know if she spoke to it or not, but yesterday in the Finance Committee for CVTA, we did allocate money in our budget that the CVTA would be putting forward for the CVTA's part and moving into the new facility. I think that was 10,000.
Thank you very much.
That'll go before the full CVTA, I think on the 25th, sir. 23rd, I think. No, 25th. Yeah, you're right. Got my meetings mixed up. And so hopefully we'll forward that through that, and that'll assist with the financial side.
So that committee's done I believe, a stellar job under the leadership of Mr. Holland. Again, the chair is always an ex officio, so we should not have any issues with communication. We haven't in the past. And the executive director will be completely involved from a communication standpoint. So that's kind of where we fell. Thank you for that information on CVTA. Ms. Page, do you have anything further, ma'am?
Mr. Chair, if there is no other discussion, I have a motion.
Very well.
Mr. Chair, I move that we give the authority to the audit committee to negotiate and work through all of the all items needed for the move, and that they are absolutely governed by the budget, and that would be their form of authorization.
Very well. We have a motion. Is there a second? Second, we have a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Cogell, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair. Dr. McGraw,
Aye.
Mr. Chambers,
Aye.
Mr. Holland,
Aye.
Mr. Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Engel,
Aye, on his behalf, he had to leave the meeting.
Ms. Fry,
Aye.
Mr. Sharp,
Aye.
Chair Davis,
Aye.
Ms. Pritchard,
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker,
Aye.
Mr. Waddell,
Aye.
Mr. Thornton,
Aye.
Ms. Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Baca,
Aye.
Ms. Page,
Aye.
Ms. Pearson,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Dr. Newbill,
Aye.
and Mr. Giovia.
Aye.
That concludes the roll call.
Ms. Cogell, I need Ms. Pritchard Poll.
They did.
You're on roll? Okay, very well.
Mr. Chair, excuse me. As you all know, we're still adjusting to the voting tool. Mr. Carroll, with your permission, we'd like to request if Mr. Holland would like to
We
cast
just said the
Mr.
same thing, so he needs to.
We just discussed it.
Okay,
So I therefore cast an aye for.
Gilbert, if you could record Mr. Holland as casting the vote in Mr. Engel's absence.
You know that he left the meeting, he only texted me, so.
Yeah, so I do.
Thank you.
At this point, thank you.
Very well, we have that noted. Mr. Holland votes in the affirmative. Thank you, Ms. Cogell. You have that, Mr. Gregory?
Yes, sir.
Very well. All right, motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the Audit Facilities and Finance Committee accepts the directive of the commission. Yeah, we want to take the lead. We want to do it well. We want to do it well. And I might add also, we look forward to communicating as often as possible with you and the executive committee to make sure that there's no gaps in communication and execution. We thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. And then just two other items on that as we move forward. There was some discussion on dates, and the full commission is aware that there may be an opportunity in October for us to be out of our existing location. We've talked about what type of cost savings that might be. But with that, Mr. Sharp brought up, and it was discussed, there could be some storage needs. And so that's going to be part of what's going to come back to the executive committee and then ultimately the full commission for an update on that. There are a lot of moving parts, and should we be able to leave early and realize those cost savings, that means there could be some offset, maybe not equal and net neutral, but there could be an offset to some of those savings or diminishment in those savings if we have storage needs. So those are some of the things that Mr. Holland's gonna lead us through. So we thank you for that. We appreciate your leadership on that. The next item on the agenda is item 3C. This is our Public Outreach and Engagement Committee report. Is Mr. Davey here?
He had an unexpected emergency and is not able, so he asked if I would do the
Sure.
intro and also asked Mr. Giovia to help lead on the committee's behalf. I hope you all can just stay with us a little bit longer. This has been a really exciting effort for the organization. We, just a little bit of history, embarked on a branding effort earlier this fiscal year on behalf of not now, after. We do not want you to be distracted by anything. Greta, please don't. Greta, please do not hand those out now. They will be on the table at the end of the meeting. We do not want you to be distracted by the booklets right now. This project was conceived of to really be able to help tell our story better about who PlanRVA is and what we do in the region, to be able to help to better communicate to those of you and those back at home in your localities, but also to be able to tell better the story of how we interact with the RRTPO and the CBTA. So this is a branding effort for the family of regional organizations, and to be able to hopefully get the professional guidance that we need to be able to guide that narrative. The Public Outreach Committee has been working with the team led by the Hodges Partnership. I see John Newman is here on the call, and the Brand Federation, Kelly O'Keefe, and I think they're going to introduce the rest of the members of their team that are here with us today. But they're going to walk you through, very briefly, given the time, a little bit of the history, but really I think we're going to try to focus the discussion today on what they believe we can do with the research and the findings and where we can go from here. The idea is that members of the Public Outreach Committee, led by Mr. Davey, members Mr. Thornton, Mr. Spoonhauer, Mr. Giovia, Mr. Waddell, would be able to be the committee that will take responsibility, if you will, for coming back to this board with recommendations for how we can live into this brand. But I'm really excited to be able to turn the presentation over to this group and let you hear what they've been up to. John or Kelly?
Thank you very much, Martha, and we're thrilled to be able to present to you today. I won't take a long time to present. I will share our screen, but I do want to affirm the goal of this effort. And if we go to the next page, I'll just talk a touch about that. the organization has adopted a strategic plan and a community engagement plan. Our work clarifies the language we use to describe the brand and provides tools that will help the commission move forward with communications. And I want to say that as we go to the next slide, our process, I won't go into detail here, but we, in all of our work, and I'm sure you're all familiar with our work in branding organizations like Dominion Energy, Capital One, CarMax, and institutions like Meadowville and City of Ashland and VCU. But whenever we do our work, what we're looking for is clarity of communications, because clarity of communication very often leads to clarity of purpose. And that doesn't mean we're trying to make PlanRVA a consumer brand, but it is very important for your good work to be well understood by those who you interact with, and that your communications are clear across any communication vehicle, whether that's a website, interpersonal communications, events, or other things. So we built this set of recommendations today on a deep dive through discovery and research. We engaged many stakeholders, including most of you along the way. And then we synthesized that information to provide a strategy and a platform which we'll walk you through today. After that, and we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, we'll implement those recommendations, but we're not going to go to implementation until you've had the opportunity to hear what those recommendations are. So we'll also say that we've made this presentation more brief in terms of the research we conducted in the interest of your time. And we're going to focus a little bit on the research, but much more on where the research leads us to. A full report is always available for your review after the fact. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ryan Chandler-Dovis, and she will walk us through the recommendations. And after that, our colleague, Fraser Whitehead, Fraser Armstrong. Wow, sorry, Fraser, it's been a while. We worked together for a long time. We'll present, we'll talk about the implications of that, and we'll lead in answering your questions.
Thanks, Kelly. And as Kelly noted, there will be a printed report handed out to you afterwards to go through this with a little more detail. I'm going to review the research fairly briefly due to our time limitations. But I want to start by saying we have a challenge. It's probably a challenge many of you are very familiar with, but there is a lack of clarity around what PlanRVA does and its regional impact today. Now, that clarity can be in some ways found in the state statute that established PlanRVA. There's 6 points here that really do a great job of illustrating what the commission was signed up to do. However, it isn't very sticky. It isn't very memorable. And due to that, stakeholders have interpreted the value of PlanRVA through many different lenses. So that's why you hired us today, to bring clarity to the definition of PlanRVA and really start to emphasize the value the organization brings. I'm not going to go again deep into these, but there are 4 clear areas where the value PlanRVA provides is consistently recognized. As a regional convener, bringing together all of the localities under one roof and really engaging in developing empathy between the different localities. So it's a place where people can share the struggles that they're having and have it heard by everyone else. As a funding conduit, and I probably don't really have to describe that, that's pretty clear. As support services, particularly for the smaller localities, and as in transportation expertise. The challenges that convolute the perceptions of benefit of PlanRVA are also fairly clear. You've talked a lot about the diversity in the region and the fact that alignment can be quite difficult when you have such very different localities involved. There's unclear relationship with how PlanRVA fits beside other organizations, and we heard some of that even in the conversation today around the CBTA. There's a transportation eclipse. So while PlanRVA does work in other critical areas like emergency management and environment, sometimes that work is eclipsed where people really are very aware of the transportation work, but go as far as to say transportation is 50% of what PlanRVA does, but aren't so clear on the other 50%. And then there's some decision-making obscurity. There's a desire to know the strategy behind the decisions being made and what structure is established to help certain projects rise to the top. So we need to claim the value PlanRVA provides by clarifying who we are, what we do, and how we do it. We identified 4 roles. They each pull from the charter because we need to stay clear to that charter, or true to that charter rather, but they provide a little bit more stickiness and clarity around what PlanRVA does. The first is the seer. We leverage our expertise, insights, and data to identify future opportunities and challenges for the region. This is a bit of an under-leveraged role of PlanRVA, but something that ubiquitously the stakeholders were able to identify as an important value. We heard things like PlanRVA has the ability to interpret trends, to talk about future impacts, and to put together dashboards and maps. I'm not going to read all of this quotes again for timing purposes, but you will have them. The second role is that of the convener. We convene local governments for discussion and collaboration. This role is very well noted, and everyone kind of is aligned around the strength of this role. And we heard that in the quotes. The third role is that of the planner. This is in your very name, PlanRVA, and yet in some ways it is an under-recognized role of the commission. So we guide the drafting of a plan of action, utilizing available and efficient resources. And leaning into this role became more and more important as we talked to people. To formulate the plans in a way that draws common threads through the conversation and makes sense. So this is a role that we think the commission can lean into further, as outlined in the charter. And the last, and in some ways the most unrecognized role, the shaper. We leverage the partners or resources necessary to solve our challenges, a solution focused on executing the plan. This is the role that starts to describe the relationships with CVTA, RTPO, and many of the other entities within the portfolio. This is where PlanRVA not only has the ability, but by charter is required to step up and find efficiencies and to help shape the solutions. It's why that whole conversation earlier around CVTA and bringing employees under the umbrella of PlanRVA exists, because it creates that efficiency. When we lean into talking about PlanRVA as a shaper, it starts to make those relationships all come into focus in a really clear and easy to digest way. So it allows us to brand one brand versus 10, to promote one brand versus 10, and be able to talk about how that role, the shaper role, extends into the PlanRVA, the commission, having roots in many other organizations, alliances, or entities. When we bring all this together, we get a very beautiful, clear visual of 4 roles: seeing, convening, planning, and shaping, all around one key big idea, our shared future, the first bullet point under our charter. And transportation, emergency management, and environment are all a key part of our shared future. You'll see some plus signs there. Housing and others are also a key part of our shared future, but it's through these 4 roles that PlanRVA is working on that shared future. Which brings me to our brand toolkit. Through a compelling articulation of its brand, PlanRVA will set the big picture so we can get credit for the sum of our parts. So who are we? PlanRVA is where we come together to look ahead. What do? We guide Central Virginia's future, focusing on high impact competencies like emergency management, environment, and transportation. And how do we do it? We see, we convene, we plan, and we shape Central Virginia's future. Put into a brand purpose statement that's a little bit more compelling, and you could use maybe as an elevator speech if someone was to ask you about the commission you sat on. You would say, PlanRVA is where we come together to look ahead. PlanRVA has been guiding Central Virginia's future development for decades. By convening dedicated leaders from across the diverse Central Virginia region, we have been identifying future needs, facilitating the development of plans around those needs, and helping to build the solutions that make our shared future brighter. Others are focused on the headlines of today, but we know that to keep our home prosperous, we must also look ahead. So we can boost PlanRVA's clout by sharing the impact of our work through the lens of these roles and competencies. We can let our work itself shine, and we should let our work itself shine. So when we go to tell stories about PlanRVA, we can tell stories about the different projects or solutions that have been established through the work of PlanRVA and clarify that story to show the role PlanRVA played through these 4 clear roles. They drive all of the experiences of the commission. When we go to tell the story through storylines with the press or others, then we tell the story of coming together to look ahead. This is a regional vision for our future. The jurisdictions that PlanRVA serves are incredibly diverse, ranging from bustling cities to beautiful farmland. Each has unique needs and a defined vision. But as unique as we are united by one undeniable truth. Our areas are interconnected. To plan for the future, we must take a regional approach to the challenges and opportunities that affect us all. Because tomorrow's solutions are born here. PlanRVA is where the region's leaders go to envision and shape the future of Central Virginia. It's a place for politicians to focus not on the headlines of today, but on the long-term vision that will keep our home beautiful and prosperous. Now, on this last slide, we had a little bit of fun bringing together something really memorable to set the tone of voice that we have when we move forward into implementation and when we talk to the world. And for an archetype to describe that tone of voice is everyone's favorite wizard. Maybe not everyone. I did hear that there are some that prefer Gandalf, or not Gandalf, the Harry Potter one. Now I can't even remember. But Dumbledore. There we go. Some that prefer Dumbledore, but we're going to be Gandalf. So Gandalf, throughout Lord of the Rings, is a seer. He's able to kind of look into the future and anticipate future risks. Then he brings together the most important leaders throughout the world they live in. Kelly is much more of a nerd around Lord of the Rings than I am, so I'm sure I'm using some wrong terminology.
Middle Earth would be the right term.
Middle Earth. He brings the leaders from across Middle Earth together to protect our home. Then he comes up with strategies with them. They work together on a strategy that involves everyone and creates a solution that ensures we all prosper. Now, we're not, saying we're going to go to battle as PlanRVA, but certainly that way of working, from seeing to convening to planning and shaping, is at the core of what we do. And that voice that Gandalf brings towards it is a really important voice for us. So he's visible, but not self-promoting. You don't really see him be, out there the way a consumer brand would be out there. You are not a consumer brand, but you do need to be visible in the conversation. Encouraging, but firm. So, in bringing together this diversity of leaders and different constituents, there's a need to be both a good listener, encouraging, bringing people together, but when decisions are made, also firm and moving forward. Wise, but curious, inspirational, but not lofty, familiar, but not stagnant. And I think that's very important. The evolution of things is a very important part of the role that you play. And accessible, but always focused strategically on the right areas. So when we bring this all together, we have a little story for you. This is really the highlight of the presentation before I hand over to Fraser to open up for questions. Look around this region. What do you see? A mighty river that carries our story in its current? A vibrant, creative, ever-changing city? Verdant farmland that stretches as far as the eye can see? Small towns where family businesses serve generations of customers. Neighborhoods where friends smile as they pass on the sidewalks. Universities that attract the best and brightest from around the world. Thrumming thoroughfares carrying people and prosperity to every corner of the Commonwealth. All these images and countless more make up the magical place we call RVA, the area of Central Virginia where we raise our families, make our fortunes, and build our lives. Each of us plays a part in making the RVA region all it can be. But sometimes urgent concerns push aside long-term planning, and our focus on our own backyard eclipses shared opportunities for advancement. What if there was a place purpose-built to overcome these obstacles? That place is PlanRVA, where the brightest minds in the RVA region convene with one simple, powerful goal: to work together to make our home the best it can be. A place where we can envision our shared future for this remarkable corner of the world. The RVA region is our home, and its future is ensured at PlanRVA. PlanRVA, where we come together to look ahead. And with that, I'm going to pass off to Fraser for some Q&A. I'll stop sharing and open it up to Fraser.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions, any input from any commission members?
So,
Yes, sir, please.
This is Brent Chambers from Ashland. A lot of the way I understand these sort of branding things work is to boil up to focus areas, and it sounds like there's a lot of good work done here. The 4 focus areas kind of make sense. The other thing is sort of your gut reaction to how they're boiled up, and I may be the only one. My gut reaction to the 4th component of what this organization does, shaping, is it just feels a little soft. It feels like there may have been some other way to sort of phrase the guiding or driving or something. So I just wanted to ask, in the process, how did we land on shaping as that 4th quadrant, that word as the 4th quadrant for what this organization does?
It's a great question, and we did have a number of conversations around it. Actually, where we started was building. But building felt less encompassing of things like the CVTA conversation earlier, where we didn't really build the CVTA. However, we are shaping the future of it by allowing things like, or by facilitating things like employment. So as we kind of leaned into this point in the charter to foster planning for such development by encouraging the creation of effective regional planning agencies and providing the financial and professional assistance of the Commonwealth, we saw that really was about shaping. Sometimes it's about funding, sometimes it's about facilitating for efficiency, and sometimes it's about actually collecting the resources and shaping a solution or building a solution. But all of those seem to be best described with the idea of being an entity that kind of takes all of the available resources to shape the output.
Anything further? Of course, yes, Mrs. Pritchard.
I'm a little bit reticent to comment or question because I am the alternate here, but short of Mr. Thornton and Ms. O'Bannon, I've probably been around PlanRVA and our PDC longer than almost anybody in this room. My history here goes back 22 years, and this is not a new problem. This was the problem the first day I walked into this school board, the old room in Burnham, that people didn't know what the PDC was or what it did, and I applaud the work that's gone on here. The one concern I have is, and I'm not sure at this point how much of this presentation is to be public facing and how much of this is for us, but the notion that, hey, you don't know who we are, but we're planning the future of the region. For some folks out there, that's a little bit of a creepy notion. I don't know who you are, but you're making plans that affect me every day. And I think we have to be really careful about how we present that notion of this sort of, if you will, secret society sitting in a room somewhere planning for the future without you having a sense of who we are. There's some things I really like about this, a lot of things I like about it, but there's some things that give me pause.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
I'll just respond that I think that's a very reasonable comment. And you asked whether this was public facing or whether this was internal. At this point, what we've presented is the strategy for communications. It's not a public facing communications document, although this would inform that. But these comments that we're receiving will also help us to shape and refine before we translate this into public facing communications. I certainly think we would want to be cautious about creating any impression that there was a secret cabal of people who are steering the future of RVA. So thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to Ms. Pritchard's question. I think it's a great question. It's one that came up in the subcommittee because I think our primary concern was a little bit that this presentation was just for the full committee, but that there should be kind of 3 different levels of materials: the public, the board, and then some combination of the regions and intergovernment relationships. This presentation is an amalgamation of all 3 of them, and sort of, I don't want to say that it conflates, but we had the same concerns seeing the presentation the first time. But we're going to get more materials as we go through this process that are going to specifically outline for internal members. New materials was mentioned for new members to the board as an example, and as well as materials that are specifically designed for the public. So that's not this.
Mr. Chair, can I pile?
Mr. Brunel.
Mr. Pritchard, I think you, so besides from Mr. Sharp here, who took over, I'm probably the second newest person to the board. And one of the things that we've discussed a lot, which is while our citizens are our ultimate client, our true client is the localities who serve the citizens. So a lot of what we've been talking about is how, because we think a lot of these same problems exist for our direct customer, which is the localities, and how do we solve that? And we think that's a very fair conversation to have with the localities who may not be utilizing our services to the most they can be.
So thank you. And as we conclude, I agree. This was something that I had a concern with when we first started is we have 2 audiences externally. One obviously is the public, but the other is the policymakers. And that's one of the reasons we talked about the road show going around respectfully, but each of us are sitting here with the authority from our local governments. So as we've been assigned the duties and responsibilities here at PlanRVA, it is incumbent upon us, I think, to make sure that some of those localities know exactly what we do, the policymakers that are sitting on those boards in the locality. So I think we need to be very, very mindful. This is great. It looked good as a first blush, but we have to have something for the policymakers as well to present to those folks who send us here as a delegation from their locality. All right. Well, thank you all very much. Mr. Waddell, yes, briefly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair. To supplement your comments, this could be a document that could be presented to the policymakers in a policymaker orientation after an election. After every election, the new board members or the new town council members will get an orientation package. This could or should be included in that for the bigger perspective of how their government fits or is benefiting from PlanRVA. Thank you, sir.
Great point. Thank you, Mr. Waddell. Thank you. That's great input.
Each of you, as you leave the room today, and those of you who are on virtually or are not able to be here, we'll make sure that we get the hard copy to you. Each of you will have the opportunity to grab the booklet that summarizes all the slides that you saw. I would like to ask that you take some time to read through that material and just as you already have in your initial feedback, kind of sit with it. And Mr. Chambers, I love the way you describe that, kind of like what's sort of the reaction that you get. I think more than the words themselves, we're trying to test this with you to say, does this feel like this is an accurate description of us? Not so much an evaluation of is this the right set of words and pictures for the external public, but like, is this the right foundation to then build that communication? This document that you have today and what you saw isn't the end product, it's the test to say, are we where we need to be in setting the tone of how we think about and describe our organization? The Public Outreach Committee will be convening again, and again, I'll reiterate, Mr. Thornton, Mr. Spoonhauer, Mr. Giovia, Mr. Waddell, and Mr. Davy are all on that committee. So we really want to be able to, from this meeting, invite your comments back to either me or members of the committee so that we can move forward with something from this, whatever resonates with the consensus of the board, so that we can start to develop those materials that are desperately needed, quite honestly, to come to the jurisdictions and communicate with local staff and to do, I think, the work that we need to be doing out in the region.
Thank you, Ms. Heater. Thank you all for your comments. And thank you for those who are virtually attending and have put this together for presentation today. With that, the next item on the agenda, item D, under 3, in the interest of time, we know that many folks here have pressing schedules. We're going to defer that. There's no action items on there, so unless there's any opposition, and I'll pause. Is there any opposition to deferring that to the next meeting? Hearing none. Item number 4, open up commissioners. Any other business that should be discussed at this hour? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.